Cushites, Caucasians, and Khazars by Patrick English. When Herodotus visited Colchians in the 5th century BC, he found that people be described as them as black-skinned, woolly-haired, that assembly of Negro type. They were, as he says, circumcised. The Colchians and Egyptians and the Ethiopians are the only races from ancient times who have practiced circumcision. The Phoenicians and Assyrians of Palestine, i.e. the Jews, themselves admit that they adopted the practice from Egypt. He noted that the Colchians wore woven linen, a main export of their country, in the same way of the Egyptians and different from all other peoples. After making inquiries of both Caucasus and in Egypt about Caucasian origin, he came to the conclusion that the legendary Egyptian world conqueror Sesostris must have left part of his army on the river Phalas, where he was returning from what was now South Russia. Howe and Wells tried to discredit Herodotus' statement by suggesting he only called the Caucasians black because he thought of them as Egyptians, and that his ideas of the Egyptian appearance were confused by many of the Negro slaves seen by him in Memphis. Herodotus, however, records nothing of having seen a single Negro slave in Egypt, where he constantly in conservation with the priests who presumably were typical Egyptians of the Mediterranean race. Since Herodotus noticed meticulously and carefully observed, says that the Caucasians were black and woolly hair, and there seems to be no reason supposing that they were otherwise. Howe and Well quoted Herodotus' account of the origin of the Dana, a shrine as evidence that he thought Egyptians as black. What he says, though, is not that Egyptians are black, but the oral tradition of the priestesses might have changed. Egyptians moved them into black doves. Near Shumika in Albazanum, the almost same district where Herodotus talking to black-skinned, woolly-haired Caucasian some 22 centuries ago, John Gunther noted the existence of a small Negro community. He was told that its members were descendants from slaves imported from Africa many centuries ago by Georgian princesses. The same community was noted by Clarence Lamont. He told that the members were descended from slaves imported from Africa more than a century ago by Turkish landowners. And in connection, he mentioned semi-active slave trade in former times. J. Mark Browning, however, mentioned semi-active slave trade as an exported one in local inhabitants, especially of Sicilian girls for shipment to Constantinople. He described Azerbaijan as a lawless land of continuous slave raiding by local chiefs. Even if Georgian princesses and Turkish landowners would ever settle in Albania, it seems unlikely they would go to the trouble and expenses to bring coal to Newcastle by importing slaves from Africa at sufficient numbers and exploring the enduring community. The exploration given for the origin of this community might well be on par with the explanation formerly given to the Almaran Island, the Negritos, that they were descendants of cargoes of an African slave ship that had once been wrecked there. This in Albania is, so far as I know, the only Negro community in the New World outside of Africa. The coastline of the Indian Ocean, and it would consider to be a great coincidence that it should be located a few miles within the Negro community that Herodotus visited. If there is no connection between them, that the Amazon Negroes are surviving remnant of the ancient Caucasian, it seems to be a valid hypothesis. The Dalapali of the Amazon in general is noted by both by Monta Byrne and W.E.D. Allen and Paul Murtaugh. The later authors remarked that the Negro types have been seen. Long skulls seem to be an anomaly in these lands of broad skulls Alpine people, as broad skulls will be from Africa. If the Colchians were ultimately of African origin, then how, when, and why did their ancestors reach the southern slopes of the western Caucasus? The great distances, but less than the distance between Taka and Serene, to their linguistic cousins of the Celts of Western Europe. Why the name ABKHAZ? We may put the BZY dialect of the Abazan language into the Bazang. And also the Bazang or the Bezan, the BNJR or the Bengajar, north of the Caucasus, seem to be many ethnic names in this region begin with Ba, B-A, or A-B, or B. If there's a tropical African element in the population, it might be possible the connection of the Bantu ethnic prefix of ABA, Ba, the plural prefix for this grammatical class of human beings. We do not know that the people whom the Greeks called Caucasian call themselves by that name. It's conceivable they call themselves ABKHAZ, and that the monarchy country of ABKHAZ in itself case took its name from them. If this is so, the syllable KAZ, K-H-A-Z, is a root or a real name for the Khazar people in the country with, i.e. Banagana or Bonagana in Africa. It is the same quasi-Bantu grammatical classes and it features some East Coast Caucasus languages. The warlike and powerful barbarians of the KAS northeast of the Hittite Empire, were dangerous neighbors to the rulers of the Hasu in the 2nd millennium BC. Genesis chapter 10, verse 8 through 12 connects Cush with the origin of the Assyrians. This is more likely to have been a Cush in Asia Minor, across the mountains of the Assyrians. Then the far-off Cush on the upper Nile. The name and identity, though, suggested a connection between the two countries, while on the other side of Cush had a resemblance to KHAZ. That suggests a connection between the Hittite king's enemy and the modern-day Kabazan, hypothetically. Herodotus Colchians. Between Ethiopia, Cush, northeast of Caucasian, and Ethiopia, Cush, South Egypt, the Greeks located the legend of Andromeda at Joppa. She was described as the daughter of Cephas in Cassiopeia, king and queen of the Ethiopians in Palestine. Among the pre-Israelite inhabitants of Palestine were giants, Achaemenid, and Nicolaic Negroes, and black Hamanites of northeast Africa. No such thing as the Middle East. Among the world's tallest people, it possibly might be too far-fetched to connect the tribal name of the Anka with the Aghanan tribe of the Nickel in the Sudan. At the end of the Old Kingdom in Egypt was invaded by barbarians from the south. It is believed that these Negroes and that they were of Negro blood, and the great pharaohs of the Middle Kingdom dynasty, Dynasty 12. Later, authorities state that the sea people who came into Nubia about this time were the Mediterranean race, as they were predecessors of the A people. However, there must be certainly there have been Negro people from the south of Nubia, and Nubia itself have been remnants of the original Negro inhabitants. The arrival of the non-Negro settlers in about the 22nd dynasty BC in the northern district of the Middle Nile region hardly disproves the possibility that Negro tribesmen may have moved northward down the Nile Valley in the same period of the wandering folks wandering. So if there is some warlike invaders that may have passed northern upon Egypt and leaving some of their numbers to become a ruling people in Palestine, reaching the highlands of the Cappadocia before the arrival of the Indo-European Hittites, such a march could have been the origin of a legend of Sesostris, whose name was borne by the pharaohs in the Middle Kingdom. In Cappadocia, the Proto-Hittite and Proto-Hittite language made Germanical use in the prefixes. This might be possible to show the influence from Bantu Africa. The name too, Pama, of the king of the Kete, who fought Namasin of Akkadi, while it cannot be claimed as evidence, has an African sound, the Pompi bearing of Uganda and the island of Pemba. Another Ethiopian in Greek legend is the jet black prince Menemon, who was described as the handsomest of all men who fought at Troy. The modern Nicolettes, such as the Skola and the Dinka, have been classed as the most handsome people in the world. He became to the aid of the Trojan and with his Ethiopian army, not from the south, the direction far off Ethiopia on the Nile, but from the east, where the Pontiac Kush lay less than 600 miles away. Only a fraction of the traditional remote from Nubia via Elam, Babylonia, and Armenia. His mother was either the dawn goddess, emphasizing her eastern origin, or Kassim, which could be in the form of Kas. His father was Tanosus, whose name has been suggested is probably the form of Danu, a great god of Kush on the Nile. He could have been a god of Kush on the Hassa also. Dunu is almost identical to Dana, and the Egyptian women or black doves who founded the Dana oracle may have not come from Egypt, but from Menemon's castle, who may have been actually black. Nona locates the first battle between the followers of Dionysus, who are specified as Lydians, and the Indians, who are repeatedly specified as Negro-type black-skinned woolly hair. The definite spot in Western Asia Minor, the mouth of Ascalate in Hassania, not far from Troy, a place having no conceivable connection with India. Now, Moses is notorious as a plagiarizer and may have been taken from Xanthos, now lost history of Lydia. Xanthos may have written of a real battle between Lydians, possibly under the prophet Mopus before the Trojan War. Negro warriors such as who fought under after in the same region under Menemon. After crossing the Caucasus from Chosus in Abyssinia, the Caucasus people ruled a wild empire between the 6th and 11th century AD. The Arab geographer Ishtar described them, remarks that the sections of the Caucasus were brown and even black-skinned, as they were a kind of an Indian. The nearest regions of India, however, are far from Caucasus and from Lydia, and were inhabited by comparable fair-skinned people where Herodotus' black Caucasus were. And the Abazan Negroes are, and just as the mountains were the southern defense of the Caucasian border. It is much easier To imagine that these black Khazars had moved over the Caucasus passes to further from then India over 2,000-mile route over the mountains and the deserts and through the organized kingdoms. The very name of the Khazars might have been derived from KAZ, if not that it is not the root of the Khazars Albania and ultimately of that of KAZ. The Caucasus had a double kingship that secluded their rule under sacred rule under the Turkish title of Khazan, and a secular ruler and a world leader under the Turkish title of Bag. The ABKHAZ, as the Greek called the Kabazan, had two kings. One is said to rule the east and the other the west, but they are mentioned as a pair rather than two independent sovereigns. The instructions that subdued the king, the sacred, seemed to be more African than Asian, besides early Egypt, where the god was constructed with the man. There are incidents in West Africa, at Shark's Point, Fernando Po, Benin, Lugao, and Odyssey, elsewhere. Strabo mentions it in Ethiopia, among the Masra and the Pontus. In the ancient Anatolia cast, it's the same as recorded by Xenophon and others. Nicolite Negro kings were not allowed to go out into battle. The Khazars believed that the process of Judaism, but accounts are given few and conflicting as when we how if they was converted. One of these accounts is so-called the letter of Hasis, which states, "Our father told us that in the beginning your settlement a place what you call Mount Seir. But our Lord knows that Mount Seir is far from the place where he lives today. Our elders said that formerly they was called Mount Seir, but persecution prevailed, and they went into affliction until they got possession of the land where they now dwell. Also, the old men of the former generations can be relied on who told us on their account of their faithfulness to as the persecution was decreed. And an army of Chaldeans rose up in anger and wrath. They hid the books of law and the holy scriptures in the cave, and for that reason they prayed in the cave. On the account of the books, they taught their sons to pray in the cave morning and evening until the times was lengthened, and they forgot and no longer knew about the cave." Why they were accustomed to pray therein, but their practice the custom of their fathers well knowing why. After a long time there arose a man in Israel who was eager to know why. He entered the cave and found it full of books, and brought them from out there. From that day set themselves free to learn the law. Thus our fathers had told us when the early generations heard of it, that one from another the whole matter is very ancient. The man in Israel that's distinguished as such seemed to stand apart from the Caucasus people. He may have been a Jew outside of the Caucasian region. Perhaps a refugee. If found in Abazan or Khazaria, a circumcised people who said their ancestors had come out of Egypt, he might as well assume that they were Jews who have forgotten all about a few items of their heritage. He may have told them so and challenged them for proof, and discovered that the cave in the books forthwith a pious fraud to bring the wanderings back to the fold. The only reference to the outside events of this account is mentioning the army of the Chaldeans. The Hurrians or the Uttar have been called Chaldeans or Chaldeans as was their great god. It may be that they were the who we meant in the rise of the army of Chaldean anger and wrath, and maybe the rise of such the kingdom of the Uran, the Van, in the 9th century BC, which may have forced the Khazan from their Anatolian land and northward, before the Simian or the Scythian invasions to flank the Caucasus, where Herodotus met the Caucasus descendants some 400 years later. Long after Herodotus' time, inhabitants of Caucasus seem to have been still in the same physical type as he found there. P.H. Lager states in the St. Jerome's in all symphonies cited in the Boetrack called the Caucasus the second Ethiopia. And the Sesostris, in the life of St. Andrew, he informed us that towards the mouth of the Aspers, on the banks of the Phalanx, there were Ethiopians. Since St. Jerome wrote in Caesarea of the 4th century A.D. and Samosis in the Patriarch of Jerusalem over 2 centuries later, it seemed like this Negro nation in the Caucasus region had remained and been in such for 1,000 years after Herodotus, and after 3 centuries before after Sopranos and Ishtar was writing the Black Khazars north of the Caucasus and on the Volga. It seems that the Sopranos' lifetime that there were Black Khazars were overwhelmed, and from then about the Caucasus nation, the Caucasus nation and empire founded. It may be surmised of Caucasus refugees to begin his career. The Arabic work of Tasa al says that according to some, the Caucasus descended from KAS, son of Japhet. This sounds very much like a reference to the Khazars of the Hittites. Well, there you have it. Talking about the Khazarian nation, and there was black people up there. Like I said, like the story said, a second Ethiopia on the banks, and they were Ethiopian. St. Jerome said the same thing in the 4th century AD, and Sopranos is the Patriarch of Jerusalem over 2 centuries later. It seems that Caucasus, that is Negro Nation, the Caucasus region, remained for being at least 1,000 years. So this nation remained for about 1,000 years. Hey, much love. Subscribe to the channel, and don't put a lot more on Black Europe, how Black people was there too. Hey, much love. Peace.